Hi, welcome. Today we're going to talk about care, giving and receiving. And those two aspects literally go together in a way you might not imagine. Stay tuned.
Conflict Mediation and You is sponsored by the Center for Dispute Solutions.
Hello, and welcome to Conflict, Mediation, and You. I'm Rick.
And I'm Robert.
Today we're going to talk about a topic that revolves around conflict, but in a way where we're talking about caregiving, caregivers, and the situation of taking one family member, taking care of another family member, and the ways in which that can create conflict. We're talking about giving and receiving. We put those two together specifically. Why?
Well, we said caregiving, and we were as we were talking about earlier. Many times we think of caregiving.
Mm-hmm.
We don't think too much about care receiving. And as a caregiver, many times that other half, the receiving, is missed. In either piece, there is the potential for conflict to come up. And as a caregiver, many times the conflict that's building up inside, internal conflict, isn't recognized as conflict.
Okay, so someone who is assigned as a caregiver or even volunteers as a...
Well, that's, let's just take a step back, because you said assigned as a caregiver, and many times the caregiver doesn't know that this is going to happen until it happens. So it's something that an individual becomes many times not out of choice. It happens
to a family member.
It could be, in this case, let's say a family member.
Because I am aware of some conflicts where one person, due to geography or something else, they end up being a primary caregiver of, say, mom or dad when they're older.
Yeah, now that's happened, and that's the type of conflict that we many times see in mediation.
Yes.
Because those family members end up having to resolve their conflict somehow. And if they have access or are aware of mediation, then they'll go that route. But what I was talking about was the internal conflict that one goes through when they are thrown into the role of caregiver. So that doesn't involve anyone
Except
the individual.
why? I mean, what kind of a conflict would someone who's giving, that would be a noble gesture, would it not? Why would it create?
Yeah, as an outsider looking in with little or no involvement might see it as a noble gesture, if you will, and doesn't he or she really love whoever they are caring for?
Yeah.
And many times that's the way that the caregiver wants to be seen. But what's happening inside the caregiver is something that is completely different.
Like what? I mean...
Well, let's say that you're thrown into the role of taking care of a relative, a parent or sibling, but something happens. They become incapacitated, a disease, an injury, or something like that, and you have to take care of them. So there are many things that are going to happen to you internally around your time, your freedom, if we put it under one heading, your freedom is affected. Now your time is not completely yours. It can be dictated by the person that is needing the care, the person that you're giving the care to. And many times this isn't talked about, because if one is to talk about it, to say that, gee, this is not right, I feel set upon, then they might be perceived as uncaring. So that's one piece of the conflict.
Right.
So this might, at this point, sound like, okay, what does this have to do with mediation?
Right.
And in some ways, there might not be a direct connection to mediation, but it can lead to what you had referred to earlier around the conflicts between siblings.
True. Yes.
So if the conflict isn't addressed initially, or when the individual starts feeling it, if they recognize it as conflict, then it could build to the point where it involves one other person, two other people, or in many cases, a whole family.
Okay, I guess I could see that, but even stepping up or somebody, I care for that person because they're my family member. I love them.
So you're supposed to do that. You're supposed
Yeah.
to think like that.
Right, right. And so why, so there's going to be some sacrifice involved. Like, where does that become an internal?
Well, as you said, there are sacrifices that have to be made. Let's say that I'm thrown into the role of caregiver, and I am not able to do things that I have been doing for many years, maybe just going bowling.
Okay.
Yeah, I can't do that, or I might not be able to do it as often as I was at one time.
Mm-hmm.
So I might become resentful because now that piece of relaxation is cut off for me.
So your time's taken.
Yeah.
But and relaxation, that's critical to someone who is giving care.
Well, now earlier when we said care giving
Yes.
and care receiving, now we just slipped over into the receiving part of it.
Okay. All right. So I there's the risk that I become too great of a caregiver, or I pour too much. Can I lose myself?
And that can happen. And that happens many times because there's this feeling of obligation.
Yeah.
I have to do this. I'm expected to do this. So there might be, an individual might go overboard with how they're doing it. If you're the person that's responsible, then you might not feel comfortable asking for help from the outside.
Right. I would. Yeah.
So
I would
you
be
would-
uncomfortable.
Yeah. So you're taking all of this on yourself, and somewhere inside something is churning. And that's the resentment builds into conflict, if you will.
Right. With oneself, as we've talked about before. Yeah. Conflict starts there.
So how do you start reacting to that? How do you address that conflict?
Well, let me do the macho thing, and why not bury it?
Oh, that's not a good word to use.
Right, yeah, you're right.
No.
Okay, why not just stuff it? Why not oppress it, ignore it, pay no attention to it, and plow through?
And in my experience, in working with people, with caregivers, that's exactly what many individuals will do.
That's what I would probably.
And then that starts taking a toll on the caregiver. It's going to come out. I mean, I keep calling it conflict, but that's going to erupt eventually in some way. So when we talk about conflict and how do we address that? How do you address that?
Well, what you're drawing, at least my attention to, is the fact that if going into this, I might not even be aware that this is going to happen. You sound like it's an inevitable risk, or
yeah, to some extent it is.
so if I don't even know that this is coming, and well, I love this person. I'm doing my obligation out of love. Doesn't feel like obligation at the time, and I'm making these sacrifices along the way. I'm not even aware that I'm at risk. I wouldn't be aware.
And yes, you probably would not be aware. And when we were talking about this,
Right.
it's part of what we want to accomplish is to make people aware of the types of things that can be buried. I used it. That can be stuffed inside of one.
Yeah.
That internal conflict will eventually come out, and then it becomes an issue, if you will, between the caregiver and the person receiving the care or other members of the family.
And I can see, especially if, let's say, I'm doing caregiving for, let's say, my mom, but I also have it's going to take time away from my wife. It's going to take time away from my other family relationships. I could see that being risked, or, I come home tired all the time, and so just don't have time to do anything else because I'm sacrificing all my time in caregiving.
And what you just said, time away from your wife, if you can imagine what that might build into.
Right, yeah.
So now what started out as something internal, now it's becoming external.
Right.
So now the conflict, not having been resolved internally, now you have a conflict between you and your wife.
And look at the rock and a hard place that I would end up with. My wife starts getting upset because I don't have enough time for us, but it becomes a trade-off between time with taking care of my mom versus time with spending time with my wife. That's a rock in the hard place. I would really be stuck.
Well, now you're getting into, I'm going to say, at least 3 possible conflicts.
Really?
You're still dealing with the conflict within yourself that you have not addressed. Now there's a conflict between you and your wife,
right,
which probably isn't being addressed.
Yeah.
And now, in spite of all your good intentions, there's a conflict between you and your mom.
Well, I want to come back to this is really complicated, but the resentment part, is that where it starts? I want you to answer that when we get back from our break. Right now, I want to give our sponsors a chance to sponsor us.
How does your small business stay top of mind with customers? From deals that bring them in with an offer, to social media promotions that turn fans into customers, to events that engage and create buzz, to emails that keep loyal customers coming back. Our easy-to-use tools will keep you in front of your customers.
Visita provides a complete business calendar, fully integrated with your client scheduling experience. You can view and manage your daily schedule and any upcoming meetings, and most importantly, schedule new appointments and follow-ups with your clients. Using Visita Calendar for client scheduling will save you time and deliver a better service to your clients. Visita Calendar automatically syncs with your existing calendar on Google, Outlook, iPhone, and more.
Welcome back. We left talking about resentfulness. Is that the starting point? Is that something we need to pay attention to?
It is one, in my opinion, it's one of the places to start from, because one can feel resentful to something and not even realize that that's building up inside of them.
Okay.
Okay. If one has to do things that you're not accustomed to doing, then you might do it out of a sense of obligation, but in the process of the doing, then become resentful to that. And if it isn't addressed, then it just gets bigger. It just grows bigger to the point where it bubbles into what I refer to as the internal conflict.
Mhm.
So, and that might show itself in many different ways. One is in the level or the quality of caregiving
Yeah.
could shift,
Yeah.
okay? The other is in the level and quality of the relationships within the grouping. In the case that you mentioned, a wife, that starts to erupt. Then if the caregiver is also required to interact with outside groups, workplace, it could show up there.
Yeah, that, okay, because
So-
if nothing else, I don't have the energy to go around to all three.
Right, and you want to take out some of your frustration, some of your resentment, and even maybe anger, and it has many different ways of playing out.
Self-destructive ways too?
Not intentionally.
Huh, wait. Not intentionally, but it's how do I self-destruct, well, how do I self-destruct myself without knowing I'm self-destructing myself?
You remember some time ago, we used the example of, you're not taking out the trash, not taking out the garbage.
Mhm.
And, that has a way of, escalating into something. But now you have all of this other unasked for responsibility, and then your significant other might say, you didn't take the garbage out.
Uh-huh.
Now that could become a point of explosion.
It's a trigger.
Yeah, it sounds really kind of silly, I guess, to use that. But, something as simple as you're on your way out the door, you're going out to get in a car, take the garbage with you, and, you snap,
Yeah. I do this for this and this for this, now you're asking for this, and then poof,
Now you're into
just out of,
a full-blown conflict.
right.
So we need to pay attention to how those things.
And resentment becomes a way. One of the ways I've thought about resentment in the past, and what I've often taught, is that anytime, the feeling of resentment is the first indication that a need is not being met, that there's some threat to a need. Once if there's a threat to the need and somebody's crossing a boundary, someone's taking advantage of me, or I'm not taking care of myself, resentment tends to be the first signal that I need to be doing something, paying attention to some boundary.
And let's see if we can tie this a little bit more into what we've talked about in the past, is that resentment is the beginning of a picture being created.
Right. If this continues.
If this continues on, then this picture that I'm creating, and in all probabilities, is a picture of loss.
Yeah.
Loss of something.
Yes. But I mean, again, I can see this sense where, is it a myth that caregiving, say my disabled child or my dying parent or even a dying spouse, it seems like it would be noble. Is that a misconception? I mean, am I just being naive to think that, oh, of course.
I'm not sure I want to put a label on it, but
You don't want to call me naive.
But I believe, and again, this is Robert's opinion.
Right.
There's no scientific research that I have to back this up or anything like that. But I believe that the way that we are raised in this culture as men, there's things that we are expected to do that if I do it, it'll make me look good. So taking care of someone is not necessarily one of the things that many men were raised to do.
Yeah, that's an excellent point. So there's a gender issue here that goes even deeper. I mean, I mean, my generation, I really wasn't rewarded for developing any caregiving skills.
In fact, just the opposite probably happened. You probably were beat up if you showed any of it.
No,
So,
no crying in baseball to the one kid, and then smack the other one for trying to hug him for, oh, it'll be all right.
well, in this what we're talking about now as far as caregiving and receiving, that's one way to look at it. But that's probably where some of it starts too, is that you have this thing inside of you that says that I have to do this if I want to be viewed as caring and loving and all of those wonderful things.
Yeah.
What can happen and what has happened to a few people, I'll say, is that if they are put in that position to become a caregiver, then there is an opportunity or the possibility that they immediately don't picture themselves in that role and they're gone.
Really? You mentioned this before in terms of three different types of people in response. Tell me that part again, because I think that would be interesting to the audience.
Now you're putting pressure on me to remember what I said 10 minutes ago or 2 days ago. Really? Okay, and I'm sure you'll correct me if it doesn't sound like what you heard before, but there are the individual, and I'm going to say, and I'll probably get beat up for this one, but in many cases it's men, and I'm just going to speak to men.
Okay.
Is that when a man is given a piece of news that something is going to change, that is going to change his life, and he has any control over it all, one of the options is to run.
Yes.
Okay, so there's that group, small group, I hope.
And there are some folks that will leave. I've heard stories.
Yeah. There are stories that over the years that I've heard of men who, when their wives tell them that they have a disease and they're going to have to go through long-term treatment,
Right.
and we don't know what the outcome might be, and those guys know, I can't do this.
Right. Well, they're not equipped for one thing.
Well, that's part of the I can't do this.
Right.
The other group might be the ones who, okay, this is what's happening, this is what I should do, so I'm going to do it to the best of my ability. That's where the potential for the resentment to start building. It might not happen right away, but going down the road over a period of time, then that's the resentment that we talked about that could start coming up at that point. The third group, am I on track to what we talked about?
Yes.
Okay. The third group would be the individual who would throw themselves completely into the role of caregiver, to the extent that they give up or let go of all of the stuff that they might have been, want to be. They let it go so that they do the best possible job of caregiving that they can do.
Yeah, and here's the dilemma, because that person, that third person, is our hero. That's the one who made the right choice. But at the same time, what you're describing, that person is the one who's most at risk.
Well, the second and the third.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, the second one could leave, and that would be a way to...
Well, they could say enough, and they go.
But the third person who's gonna...
They're going to hang in for whatever reason, and that sounds... Well, they're going to stay.
Yes.
They're going to stay.
Is it inevitable that if they make the decision up front that I'm going to stay and I'm going to go through this, is it inevitable that they're going to feel resentment?
You made it, the way that you said it, it sounds like they would make this decision that I'm going to stay. And in many cases, I don't believe that it's a conscious decision that's made.
Oh.
It's like.
It's a daily.
I get
commitment.
into it, and each day
Yes.
I'm doing it to where now it becomes part of me, part of what it is that I need to do.
So it's even, so if each and every day I get up and I make the commitment again that I am going to do what this person needs and sacrifice my time, my relationships, my money, my self-care, if it's just a daily thing, I've only got to go through this for another 12 to 24 hours. I would never stop to think about, I might be feeling resentment. I'll just keep pushing it away, pushing it down, pushing it past.
You're saying it as if there is an end in sight.
Well, the 12 hours, wouldn't that be the end?
Yeah, that's what you see as an end, but there might not be, 12 hours go by and then it just rolls into another 12 or 24 hours.
Yeah. All right, I've got this internal conflict. And let's say I'm going to be aware of it. And I may even need to anticipate it. What advice would you tell that person out there who is in the midst of this right now already? And we don't know if they're in the middle, beginning, or end because there is no end, or they're about to take on a responsibility of care, giving and receiving.
Okay, then that takes us into another area, if you will.
Okay.
So I think you need to take us to break.
All right.
And then we'll come back and talk about it.
And you've got something to share.
I think so.
Okay. All right. So it'll be worth coming back to talk about that. So join us for our next episode, where we'll continue the conversation on caregiving and receiving, putting those together. And for more information, be sure and contact Center for Dispute Solutions. Phone number is 404-991-0072. I look forward to seeing you at our next episode.